actually the best way to describe a lot of the printer testing positions at HP. For several years, I worked at HP through a temp agency. And because of the way the system's set up, we temporary employees were ineligible to be permanently hired. I even worked with several people who'd been temporary employees for 10 years or longer. I had originally applied with the temp agency in December of 2001 because I was having trouble finding a job in the recession that followed September 11th. And although the temp agency offered health insurance, the cost was so high that hardly anybody could afford it, myself included. So I purchased my own plan on the private market, and it started off costing me $100 a month. The temp agency did provide decent dental insurance though, so I got my dental insurance through the company. Well, I managed to work my way up to a lead position, which actually paid a decent wage. But then 6 months later, I got laid off, because one of the projects I was supposed to work on got delayed by HP. Well, I was rehired by the temp agency, but because of wage cuts, my new position only paid $9 an hour. Well, then my private health insurance plan rose to $200 a month. My rent was raised by $70 a month, and my car started breaking down all the time, so I had to take out a car loan to buy a used car. Well, my salary no longer covered my living wages, my living expenses, and so I had to use what little savings I had to actually meet my monthly bills. Well, a few months later, I got a $700 bill from St. Luke's Hospital. And even though I had health insurance, in order to afford it, in order to make it be only $200 a month, I had to get a $5,000 deductible. So it wouldn't pay anything towards the bill. Well, I ended up having to apply for financial aid through St. Luke's Charity Foundation. And because I was able to actually prove that my wage did not meet my living expenses, I qualified for the full amount of financial aid. And so thankfully, my entire bill was covered. But I thought it was rather sad. I was working full-time, I had insurance, and I still had to apply for financial aid to cover the bill. Well, I managed to work my way back up again to a firmware testing position that actually paid a pretty good wage. Then one day, my coworkers and I were invited to a meeting with the temp agency. And in the meeting, we found out that the reason for the cuts over the years was because each time the contract with HP came up for renewal, HP actually asked the company to bid a lower amount, or else they would risk losing the contract to a different company. And they told us that more cuts were more likely coming in the future. Well, a few months later, a manager came to the lab where I worked, and they told us that HP would be permanently closing down the lab in 2 days. The next day, we were asked to box up everything in the lab, and then we had to pack everything onto a truck, and then they asked us to turn in our badges. Well, I knew I could probably ask to be rehired on again for a lower position with the temp agency, but at this time, those jobs were only paying $8 an hour. The temp agency also announced that they were going to be cutting all benefits, including the dental benefits and the flexible time off benefits. Well, and over the years, HP had been placing a ton of restrictions on contractors, and it really made you feel like you were almost a second-class employee when you worked there. So I decided, all in all, I'd be a lot better off actually going on unemployment and taking my chances in the job market. But I had a coworker, and she had just recently moved to Idaho, and so she wasn't eligible for unemployment. So she asked to be rehired on in one of the $8 an hour positions. Well, I talked to her a few weeks later, and she said that the temp agency had introduced a really new strict dress code, and clothes that had any kind of logo or print or graphics on them weren't allowed. Basically, I had to wear something that was pretty much a solid color. And she said she didn't have any clothes that met the new dress code. But because she was only making $8 an hour, she was having to really struggle to buy new clothes. And she said that it was the first time she'd actually worked at a job that paid so little, and at the same time was placing a ton of restrictions on her. So, thank you very much for listening to my story.